Hello and welcome to the Uncapped Podcast, brought to you by Roasthouse Pub, one of Frederick's finest craft beer and culinary destinations, where great people come to drink amazing beer. Visit them to track their taps and menu at roasthousepub.com or download the digital Pour app to track what's on tap. This is episode 71, and I'm your host, Chris Sands. This is a third attempt at recording this episode, so I can say without a doubt it's going to go perfect this time. And from the Baltimore Whiskey Company, we have co-founder Max Lents in the studio for the second time.
Pleasure to be here.
And I notice Eli is not with you.
Eli's not with me. Still surviving in a cave of barrels at the old distillery.
So you think, are you going to move him over, leave him locked in the old one?
We're gonna send him on the truck with the barrels and just pallet jack him off in the new place.
That'll make it easy for him. Doesn't have to find a ride.
No.
So speaking of the new location, how's the Union Collective moving along?
Oh man, it's coming at us like a freight train. It's happening. We are about to pour our brew floor, which is great. That actually the prep work on that starts this week. We have dug all of the wells for our geothermal system, which I'm not sure if we talked about that or not last time.
I don't think we talked on air. I think after we wrapped up, you were excited because they were going to come and evaluate whether or not you were going to be able to.
So we were about to do our test well. Well, the test well was a success. We struck water, and we hit enough water that basically greenlit the project. So the new distillery, all the process side cooling, of which there's a lot in distilling. You have to cool your mash, and more importantly, during distillation, your condenser has to constantly cool down the steam production to get your alcohol to come out as liquid. All of that cooling will be done with groundwater. Will be heat exchanged with groundwater.
And that's like, what, 50-some degrees?
54,
okay.
Yeah, 54 year-round, and we'll be moving about 100 gallons a minute out of the water table through a heat exchanger with our reserve tank, and then putting it back down in the water table through injection wells, kind of at the other end of the lot, because all these things are up kind of near the parking lot. So it's actually lossless for the water table. It doesn't change the volume at all, and the actual heat exchange is like a drop in the bucket because it's such a massive,
the vast volume of it.
It's just an ocean of water under there. So it's pretty cool, and it's a really awesome system.
So besides, I imagine one huge benefit and reason for doing that is the green aspect of it. Good for the environment. Chillers are very energy intense. We would have had to donate basically an entire extra electrical box to power the chiller we would need. And this, running the geothermal system only takes a couple of small pumps, very, very light on energy use comparatively. So there's both cost savings as well as saving the world savings. It's kind of, so you can feel good from every angle.
Yeah.
Well, is Union doing anything like that too? Or
Union is doing their own thing, but beer cooling is different. You really require a chiller because you have to crash cool a lot faster than we do. So 54-degree water is not nearly cold enough.
Oh yeah, because they run through a glycol because it has to drop.
Super intense temperature drops in brewing.
So you have that going. Have they started to do anything with that yet, or do you have to do your brew floor first?
Well, the wells are dug.
Okay.
So we've got 6 wells on site already dug. I will be personally sawing some asphalt across the parking lot to prep for one of the trenches here in the next couple of days. And other than that, there's they'll install the control system in our own space and run pipes through the building just to get it in. But the most intense work, at least in my mind, I don't know as a well digger what you think the hardest thing is. Maybe it's like tying electrical wires, but to my mind, drilling 6 350-foot holes in the ground and getting water piped out of it seems the crazy part. So that's already done.
One of my friends had geothermal installed at his house, and I think he said they had there's one specific company, at least in the Frederick area, you want to use because it is difficult. And
it's difficult. Yeah, geothermal HVAC is a little bit of a different animal. You usually wouldn't be pulling water up. You'd basically run a big heat exchanger through the ground, and in the winter you would put down cool air and it would heat back up in the ground and it would come out as warmer, and in summer you'd be putting hot air in the ground and it would cool back down and come out cooler. So it kind of works in both seasons. Since we're only cooling, we can't do a system like that because eventually we would heat up the ground around our heat exchange thing, and you would lose your heat exchange BTUs, which is why we need to actually bring the physical water up as kind of an endless supply of cold only.
But in the scheme of what you're doing, it's definitely the cooling of your product that is way more energy intensive than the HVAC of your space.
Which we don't do. We're going to talk a lot of whiskey today, but we don't HVAC our space for the whiskey barrel aging process because the climate interactions with the barrel are very important to a whiskey's terroir, and it kind of influences how the whiskey ages in a barrel. And we believe in whiskey being an expression of a place. So it's very cold in the distillery in the winter, and it's very hot in the summer. And the new space will be the same, although we expect maybe just by virtue of being in a space with other people that are HVACing that it might be a little more temperate, but certainly, over this winter on the really cold week where we had, I forget what the thing was off the coast.
The bomb cyclone?
The bomb cyclone. We had 2 of our fermenters ice over.
Oh, jeez.
So it was cold. It was cold in there.
So, so I hope you threw Eli some blankets. Or is he just immune to it at this point?
He's kind of like a husky. Okay. He just curls up, insulates himself with his own body heat.
That's convenient for him.
Yeah.
So that was I'm still, even the more I would learn about it, like the whiskey aging process, amazed by all the factors that can dramatically change the taste and the smell that the whiskey pulls from the barrel. And like what you just said, one of them being not even just the constant temperature it's kept at, but the fluctuations in temperature that it experiences.
Yeah, it's funny. The different places around the world, Japan and Scotland and Kentucky and Ireland, they'll all talk about their climate being so unique as to produce the world's best whiskey, right? So in Kentucky, we've got very cold winters and very hot summers, and that helps the liquid in the barrel expand and contract and pull in and out of the wood, and that's why we make the best whiskey in the world in Kentucky. And in Scotland, it's really cool here all year long on the islands. So, it gets to sit very still. It lets us, age it very, very long without it becoming over oaked. And it's really this cool Scottish climate that allows us to make the best whiskey in the world. And neither extreme is right. But they are right that it is a huge influence on their product. So it's always a factor in your production, but there's not necessarily a right or wrong climate to do it, but it is going to affect the final product.
Eli said he doesn't need any blankets, so
that's what
you're
I
a husky.
Said. Yeah,
he's reconfirming what you said.
When Eli finally gets on the show, people will be very interested to meet this man.
It's fun just to attribute things like I do to Graham. He sits back there silent. I can say anything I want about him and people just believe it. Every once in a while he'll yell over or glare at me like he just did. But still.
Turn your mic down.
Now you can turn it back up. Thank you. But so if you're ever in a debate with those people, you could just laugh at them and say, that's great. We have those fluctuations in a week in Maryland. So
from morning to night. Yeah, exactly.
In Maryland, it's the fluctuations from freezing to 80 degrees.
Tell you what, it was we had a couple of really warm weeks in February where it had been very, very cold the week before. And the really intense temperature changes like that aren't seasonal, but a day later, I had visible fog in the distillery over the winter at some point. But the barrels go crazy. I mean, like trying to get a bung out when it's gotten really cold from hot and that's just like created this vacuum in the barrel that's sucking everything in. And then when it gets really, really hot really quickly, you see them kind of start sweating a lot more than they're used to. Anyway, it's something, and it's a very, it's not hypothetical. If you're in there and it gets hot from a cold day, you literally see things happening to your barrel.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Is there ever a wide enough fluctuation where it actually causes a problem?
Barrels are not perfect ever. So we've developed some coopering skills So Eli will go if on days where it gets really hot, certainly in the summer, every now and then you'll find some leaks and go up there and have to repair them and use a little chisel to create a space and put a wood spile in there and stick it in and kind of close up the stuff. So there's a lot of maintenance. It's just kind of ongoing. One of those things. It's like laundry, you know.
But once they're swelled up with product in them, there's less likely that
it's right. So when you get a dry barrel, you typically want to fill it up with water for 24 hours before putting whiskey in it, and then you put whiskey in it. And when you first put water in it, you might see some really big leaks.
I had taken a bourbon making class, and once I removed the bourbon from the little 3-liter barrel I had, I didn't do anything with it. And then a few weeks later, I went to put something in it. I was told to put water in it first. So, and it was around the same time I had taken McClintock's whiskey making class, and they had told us with theirs too, just to get them to swell back out to put water. And I put them in those two, like a little bit of a leak here and there, but it swelled up pretty quickly. Right. The bourbon barrel one I had, because it had been sitting in my house for I don't know how many months, I went to pour it in and I didn't look at it first. Everything just poured instantly right back out. It had shrunk up so much. Yeah. So that one I soaked in water and then it swelled up.
We've experienced with a few different soaking methods, but we've tried this. We've like steamed barrels before and stuff. But yeah, the truth is even after they're swollen, you put whiskey in them, they're good. But then in a few months when it heats up, you'll go find some leaks in them as well. So normal, typical stuff. Even when we get, we've gotten some used barrels from Heaven Hill Distillery and a few other distilleries. And if you look carefully over them, you'll see their fixes. You'll see little spiles and stuff coming out where they had to go in and chisel. And I think Buffalo Trace has hires part-time people to just wander around their rick houses and look for leaks. And they're just leak finders.
Have you talked to Free State Cooperage at all yet?
We have, absolutely.
Cool.
Yep.
Are you planning?
We'll certainly, especially when they start doing the Maryland Oak, full-size Maryland Oak barrels. I can't imagine we won't do some project with that.
Because you source a lot of your ingredients, from Maryland, right?
Yeah, Maryland and surrounding areas. All our rye grain comes from Thurmont, and we get local apple juice for our brandy products.
So I guess now you mentioned rye. This is a good time to talk
rye. That's why I'm here.
Everyone is, at least if the internets and social medias are accurate, people are looking forward to this.
Yes. A little worried that those are all Russian trolls.
Yeah,
we've got this propaganda. It's a propaganda thing. I've hired Russia to hype up our whiskey. No, so
we'll be launching an investigation, collusion into that.
This is the big Frederick news story that broke as the BWC has hired Russian trolls to abuse Twitter for their whiskey hype. So I am very excited to be here, not just because I love doing this, but we are officially announcing our whiskey release, which has been a long time coming. We are the oldest dry whiskey distillery in Baltimore. We've never had whiskey on the shelf because it's all been in barrels for a number of years. So I brought with me a full bottle of Epic Straight Rye, Baltimore Epic Straight Rye whiskey. It's the first rye distilled in Baltimore in over 50 years. It is a minimum of 2 years old when it's barreled, which makes it a straight rye. It's bottled at 100 proof, and it is fermented, distilled, and aged in our Baltimore distillery. Currently still the one on Sisson, soon to be Union Collective, which is about a mile away, so I'm very close. And I've also brought the whiskey that you have in front of you to do a little, the very first publicized tasting of the finished product, Epic Rye. So
hopefully I like this, or at least lie about it.
One of the two. I prefer the former.
Well, as I was commenting earlier, during one of the first 3 tries before we started recording, it smells amazing.
Yes. So we really couldn't be happier with the product. When you make whiskey, you make a lot of decisions early, right? What's your mash bill? What kind of still are you going to use? How long do you ferment? What kind of yeast do you use? And all these things. And we obsessed over these details forever. And at some point, though, you have to say, okay, this is how we do it. This is how we make our whiskey. And you do it, and it comes out, and you can be happy with the white whiskey or not happy, whatever. You know, we like our white. But we were in general, we knew it was a high quality white spirit. Like the actual production methodology was very tight and very detail oriented, and we took a lot of care, and we continue to take a lot of care making our products. But until you start getting a little deeper into the aging, you don't really know what's going to come out on the other side and whether the decisions you made produced a spirit that you were after. So we always reserve the right to kind of tweak things on the way if we felt like we needed to. But we are not doing that. We really love our mash bill, and the kind of the blend of yeast selections that we use. We really think we stumbled upon something really special. So I'm very excited for you to try it. But
yeah, I'm going to pull a radio stunt before we try it and take a quick break to thank Roasthouse Pub for their continued support of the Uncapped podcast. March 27th, not the 2nd, 27th, there will be a Wardaca beer dinner. And you should definitely come out for a beer dinner sometime because they are amazing. And Wardaca makes amazing beer, so it would be a good opportunity too. And also, everyone, keep your eyes open. I talked about this last week, I think, maybe. But we'll be coming out with a Roasthouse V IPA, get it? IPA card for Uncapped listeners, where you'll get exclusive access and rewards for having that card. So once again, Roasthouse Pub, thank you for your support. So one quick, throughout the aging process, I assume you try it.
We taste it 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, and then it's ready at 2, or at least it's available for us to decide it's ready at 2 years.
So how difficult is it to control yourself to not try it more often?
We don't control ourselves. We try them often. Right now we've got 70 full barrels of rye. So our current system, we're able to make 3 a month, which doesn't sound like a lot. It's about 750 bottles. So it's actually a pretty good amount of whiskey, really, for at least for kind of a single market. It's enough to make an impact. But at this point, we have 70 barrels. So thieving a little bit, especially when you kind of make a decision like, do I want to taste 6 month or 1 year, 18 month today? And which ones haven't we tasted? And which ones do we want to do follow-up notes on? Like, there's no shortage. Like, there's no need to control oneself when it's just me and Eli and sometimes Ian and Eden, or kind of a guest of the distillery, and we want to do guest tasting notes and stuff. There's enough whiskey up there on the shelf that there's just not much reason to not try it.
I think we should try it.
I think we should try it.
Not only is this is the first time I ever drank out of a Glencairn.
Oh yeah,
and then the first I have been apparently, and this is the first straight rye that I believe I've ever had. Ooh. Not just Maryland straight rye. I think the first straight rye. Yeah.
Interesting.
Because that has to, by definition, that has to be 2 years aged or older, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So most of what I had is only ever Maryland spirits. I think maybe there was some in PA that I may have, but I don't think they were rye.
Interesting. But you never had like Pikesville White Label or?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to Rye Whiskey. This is a super unique mash bill and production process, right? We have a custom copper pot still that we help design so that the shape of your still always influences your spirit. But a very unique mash bill. We use a very high malted rye content, and most rye whiskeys don't use malted rye at all. But we use a pretty sizable chunk, and a lot of our production methods are kind of taken from the tradition of the Scottish and Japanese distillers, a lot of kind of where we make our cuts and how we do our fermentations. So it really does have a malt whiskey influence, even though malted barley and malted rye don't have the same profile, but malt is a very kind of distinct thing. So very big tropical notes in there. You certainly get the vanilla, caramel, and classic rye spice, the kind of cumin, cinnamon notes.
It is really good.
Thank you. But we also get some really cool kind of melon notes and ripe bananas and some dark fruits, some cherry and plum. So kind of a really nice fruity, bold, young, high-proof rye, which is cool.
Yeah, even the first taste where you expect to get the most amount of burn, and it's there, it's letting you know, but it's not overpowering. But then the subsequent tastes were just so smooth.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. Really cool, like maple syrup, honey on the palate. It's got legs. It's oily. It's viscous.
It's definitely viscous. It's like slowly slithers its way back down the...
Mm-hmm.
Graham was looking at it longingly, I thought I would share. I want it back, though.
So that's Epic Straight Rye, and we can't wait to get it out on the shelf. You know, there's something still very exciting in the whiskey world. You know, if you went to a liquor store 10 years ago, you know, maybe you'd find a rye whiskey or a couple of rye whiskeys on the shelf, right? Pretty rare rye whiskey 10 years ago. Now you can go and there's probably a little rye section. There may be 20 brands on the shelf, but out of those 20 brands, you know, there may only be 3 or 4 distilleries really involved in them. And the majority of them are likely sourced rye, right? And most of the sourced rye in the world is from a singular distillery, right? So an actual new brand of rye that was distilled on a unique system that has a new mash bill that's done with a new yeast strain that uses kind of, and then having a proper age to it is actually still a rare and exciting thing for a whiskey person to find on the shelf. So
yeah.
Having a really kind of new, fresh expression of rye that's kind of built from the ground up is still something to be excited about. So we're really excited about getting it out there, and we think...
And people should be, because it is really, really good.
It's the other end of the equation, right? It has to be good, and we're lucky enough to have great whiskey coming out. So how early in the aging process are you able to taste it and confidently say to yourself, okay, this is going to turn out good? Yeah, we were excited at 6 months. We were, I'd say, cautiously optimistic at a year, and then the 18-month tasting, we just let all the emotion arise. we kind of knew at that point that we had done it, so to speak. Yeah, there's an interesting, barrel aging is interesting, right? Because there's a few things that barrels do, and not all of it is intuitive. So the obvious stuff is that barrels give flavor. They're charred on the inside, and it kind of breaks all the oak down and lets it release all the vanillins and kind of vanilla and this oak astringency character into the whiskey. So you kind of, by addition, you are flavoring your white whiskey with vanilla and oak and all these kind of things that whiskey tastes like. But there's the less intuitive side, which is the barrel is bleeding acidity into the whiskey, and once that acidity reaches this kind of precipice and it happens at about 6 months, a chemical equation starts ramping up. You know, the engine of this chemical equation starts going, and after a little while, after 6 months, then it's really happening. And what that chemical equation is doing is this kind of acidity is taking flavor compounds that came out in your white whiskey and things that are produced by the yeast, you know, your ester profiles and your lighter acids and alcohols and stuff, and they're actually taking these flavor compounds and changing them from one thing to a different thing. So if you ever get to taste some white whiskey next to its, you know, 2 to 10-year-old version of itself, it's not always obvious how one became the other. They just don't taste the same. It's not just, oh, it's this one, but with a lot of oak and vanilla. It's this entirely, fundamentally, chemically different, altered thing that isn't what it was at some point.
Yeah.
And that kind of can only happen after you reach a certain point of aging, which is kind of one of the things that influenced where we wanted to hit our mark in terms of age.
Yeah, because there are certain things you can do to speed up, like just that flavor transfer
in terms of
right, that chemical change that takes place, that
there's really no
time driven.
There's just nothing, no replacing time in that one. You know.
So do you make that as a blend of the barrels, or is it all
batch one, which I will announce now, will be available March 17th at the distillery. Will be the first bottles available. Will be single barrel expressions of the very first batch. So the very first batch of whiskey filled 2 barrels. Those barrels will be emptied separately, bottled separately, But those will be single barrel batch 1 expressions of epic rye, nice. And those will be the kind of commemorative bottling of the first rye distilled in Baltimore in over half century, which we think is exciting and deserves a special bottling. So that'll come out March 17th. We're having a little party. We'll have some food. We'll have a caterer down there making cocktails with some of our spirits, which will be cool. I think we're going to have some music. All of the details, please check our Facebook in the next day or two, and all of that will be up on Facebook. And then moving on, since we do about 2 to 4 barrels a month, the subsequent releases, which is mostly typical of all whiskey, will be blends of those barrels. Yeah. So we're not sure whether we'll do quarterly releases and have it be a larger pool of barrels, or whether we'll do monthly releases. We'll probably play it by ear a little bit in the first year or so.
So now you're at the point where this will just be one of your steady products.
Yes. Right? Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if we sell out from time to time.
Yeah.
But there's always going to be the next batch right around the corner.
Awesome. Do you have some that you're saving away to age longer, or will that really not
explicitly speaking, we don't have those barrels yet. Since we only make 3 barrels a month, a typical way to develop an older expression would be to withhold about 10% of your barrels every time you're dumping barrels and age them up. But at 3 barrels a month, that's only like 3.5 barrels a year, which is just not a substantial amount. It's not kind of worth withholding the whiskey. So in the new space, when we start making 12 to 20 barrels a month, then withholding barrels will make a lot more sense, because we can hold enough back to actually start having a stock of older stuff. So we'd love to do either a 5 or a 6 year, and then out of that, maybe one day we'll have a 10 year out there.
So what would that do to that, though? Because it
would be different. So rye's an interesting,
not necessarily better, just different. Because tasting that, I don't see it's not. I'm definitely a novice when it comes to tasting whiskeys, but I don't taste that and think there's
needs
room
more time.
Right. This needs improvement. I mean, it is really good. So
well, that's one of the cool things about rye, and this is why we do a 2 year straight rye. Young rye is almost its own category. People talk about young rye as a young, bold, aggressive rye, because the rye grain still speaks. It's not all covered up by the barrel. Rye, to me, and I think it's fairly obvious to most palates, is that rye is a more interesting grain profile than corn, right? So corn sugars, which are what you're fermenting in bourbon and corn whiskey, which I love, bourbon and corn whiskey, are not particularly interesting as a grain. But rye has these awesome, the pumpernickel flavors and the kind of rye spice, cooking spice thing that people talk about when they drink rye. So having that be a little more expressive by doing a young rye is a product decision. It's not necessarily we can't wait any longer thing. Kind of our personal taste, we think bourbon is probably ready at 4 years, and anything over can be great, right? 4 to 20, doesn't matter. But kind of 4 years is a really nice, top of the bell curve for, what a 4 year bourbon is kind of right in the pocket for the right amount of barrel character for us. And rye, for us personally, we thought 2 years was top of the bell curve, and we really love those young, bold, high proof ryes that really speak to the grain. And then as you get older, the kind of profile between rye and bourbon come together a little bit, because the barrel
imparts more and
more. So the kind of the flavor profiles grow together and become that old, oaky, astringent, vanilla forward thing. And the rye and the corn both get kind of reeled back a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I would then probably prefer a young rye, because I like that the spicy rye characteristics that are there. That's why I like beer that's made with rye. So I really hope that you and Union are working on some kind of thing with your rye whiskey and rye baby.
So we haven't done, explicitly speaking, rye and rye baby, but there is a collaboration in a barrel of Union and BWC already. It's a project we affectionately refer to as BORT. I don't know if I talked to you about this last time I went off the air, but so Union, essentially, this is a project that goes way back among the founders of BWC, the BORT project. But you know how to make port, right? Port is basically wine that's been topped up with brandy, and brandy is distilled wine, right? So it's kind of topped up with its own distilled essence in a barrel, and it kind of develops into this other thing, this fortified wine. And you can do the same thing with apple brandy, and apple brandy and cider, and that's Pommeau, and that's a lovely drink. So we thought that there should be a beer version of it. So it's beer
nice.
port. So right now it's called Bort. Not sure if we'll go live with that branding or not, but we might, because we really like talking about
you
the Bort.
may have created a whole new
genre. No, this is a whole new thing, and we've already invented mezcal style apple brandy and Pachuga apple brandy. Not without the whole tradition of mezcal, of course. But Bort is pretty fresh. So we got the recipe for Snow Pants, brewed it, distilled it, and then brewed some more wort, topped up a barrel part of the way with the wort, and then topped it up with the distilled Snow Pants. And it's been aging for, I think it'll be 2 years in the fall.
Nice.
And it's been in there for a long time, and it's starting to get pretty good. And we did test batches of other beers really early on that sold us on the idea as real. So that's in the works, and we would like to have a whole Bort program. Talk about this in a hypothetical sense a lot in the new space, about having our Bort section with a bunch of different beers. We can have our Rye Baby Bort and our Snow Pants Bort. Anyway,
Pajama Pants would make a good Bort too, I think.
Pajama Pants, smart, yes.
Have that coffee roasty.
We were thinking about
there.
calling it Hot Pants. Anyway, yeah, lots of Bort. We feel like there's a lot of Bort in the future, and that people will be drinking the Bort one day.
I think people will be clamoring
for Bort. Can't get enough of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you talk about the excitement of a new rye whiskey hitting the market. A whole new category is Baltimore Whiskey Company is groundbreaking.
Yes. We're always pushing the boundaries
of what kind of alcohol can come out of a barrel.
Exactly. The world, we never have all the answers.
So you say March 17th.
March 17th, launch party for Epic Straight Rye at the distillery. We did pre-sell part of the first barrel 2 years ago. So those bottles will come up for the people who have already purchased them at the same time.
That's St. Patrick's Day.
That is St. Patrick's Day. So it'll be 1 to 5. The party will be 1 to 5. So kind of daytime going out St. Patrick's Day. If y'all want to come by, have a cocktail, try some whiskey again, pick up a bottle. There will be limited bottles available. But even if we sell out, we'll make sure we hold some back so everyone gets to try it and at least await the next release, which would be cool.
How many bottles, or you don't know yet until
don't know until we actually physically empty the barrels, which we haven't. We're guessing 100 to 150 extra bottles in there. Tough to say.
Over the course of 2 years, how much do you lose?
We will start knowing that soon. Yeah. Climate dependent, right? If it's a humid climate, you tend to lose alcohol to the air versus water. If it's really dry, a lot of times the water will come out first, so your proof in the barrel goes up as the volume goes down.
Okay.
Our volume goes down and our proof goes down. And once we've emptied, say, 10 barrels, we'll have a better understanding of our own company's equation based on our climate.
Which will then change again after you
a little bit, but presumably not really all that much, because we still won't be HVACing. You know, we'll have a ceiling fan and a wall fan, just to keep some air movement in there in the summer, so we're a little bit more comfortable in the space than in the kind of the hot box that is BWC. But it ought to be pretty similar.
If I remember correctly, you only use 55.
53.
Yeah, 53. Yep. Okay. You like the big ones.
We like the big ones. Yeah, that's for us. To age it for a full 2 years, it's hard not to get over oaked with the smaller barrels.
Yeah, because that's where
because that does imply more oak.
Yeah,
quickly.
where the ways that you can speed up the flavoring process, but not the chemical process.
Yeah.
Cool. So maybe not quite as exciting as the rye whiskey, but you do have some other stuff for us to try. And
I do.
About.
I brought a bonus bottle. Do you want your own glass of this?
I think so.
Okay. So
I do.
I remembered, I didn't think we did this last time. This is a distillery only bottle, so it doesn't make it out of the distillery very often. It's kind of a homebody. But I thought one thing to taste wasn't enough. So, this is the Green is Gold apple brandy.
So why is it distillery only?
Here, you can check this out if you want. It's just something we bottle once a year. So we only made 250 of those bottles this year, and we sell them until they're sold out. And then next year we'll do another. But it's a very cool product. It's kind of a very small Solera system. And in a Solera system, you never empty a barrel entirely. So say you had a line of 5 barrels, and you barreled out of the oldest one. You'd take half the barrel out, and then from barrel 4 you'd move half that barrel to top up barrel 5, and barrel 3 you'd do that in barrel 2, and you kind of move everything down the line, and then you top up the newest barrel with new make, right? And you always barrel out of the old one. And then really big systems you can kind of barrel out of whatever you want, but you always kind of fill upwards. So we started this kind of very small, it's a 3-barrel Solera now, with 2 rye whiskey barrels, used rye whiskey barrels at the front, and then a French oak port barrel as the finishing barrel. So
this, not to be confused with Bort.
Not to be confused with Bort. This is a rare fortified wine. A French oak port barrel. So this is almost actually 2 years old at this point. Apple brandy. We love apple brandy as a company, but apple brandy has a really long history in America as well, older than rye whiskey. Before rye whiskey, people were drinking rum and apple brandy. It was really one of the very first spirits distilled in America. So it's apple country. There's a lot of history that we are partaking in by doing apple brandy at all. It also, flavor profile wise, is not all that dissimilar to whiskey, right? It's defined. The barrel character is a big part of it. You still get a lot of apple character in there, but it is kind of a caramel, vanilla sipping spirit.
Yeah.
That is not unlike sipping on a whiskey, just has this kind of fruit character to it. So this is about 2 years old. I think this one's about 23 months. It was really very close to being a 2-year-old proper. But really nice. And we think it's a very, very strong example of American apple brandy, which is a pretty fun thing to be doing.
That also is really good. I like that. Do you want to try some, Graham?
Yeah. The tiniest bit of extra sweetness from the port on there. You get some like great bubblegum flavors, some tannic apple peel stuff.
That's definitely, I was picking that up, definitely. I'm horrible at tasting things and discerning like the individial tastes, other than
it's a lifelong project,
unless it's like a slap you in the face
right
taste, because it's often like
Fireball. I get a little cinnamon in there. Yeah,
it's like I listen to some people describe what a beer tastes like, or a whiskey or something. I'm like, you're so full of it. It doesn't. Now you're just saying words.
Some of them are. You hear people being like, it tastes like fresh cut grass in the spring when it's been raining the day before. There's like, a lot about the different kinds of grass you're smelling. And there's just kind of some truth and some, floral language used in the thing. But I will say that you get better at tasting as you devote effort to it. Picking out notes, every time we do a barrel taste at 6 months, 1 year, 18 months, we record the tasting notes. We go through them and we don't talk about them, and then we go through them, and we've started to match notes better as we've gotten better at nosing and tasting. And part of that's just understanding our own spirits.
But yeah, definitely pick up the added sweetness. It doesn't have that spicy.
Right. There's no sugar, but the kind of being finished in the port barrel, like a sherried Scotch, pulls just that fortified wine sweetness a little bit, and French oak just imparts a really nice note in there.
So was apple brandy, is that because of the abundance of apples and then the high sugar content that apples have that
it's easily fermentable, right? People have been fermenting apple juice forever. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the idea, yeah.
But close
it's
enough.
Like wine, right? Of course, they're distilling wine into brandy because there's so much wine, and there's grapes, and people grow them and they drink them. And yeah, people were growing apples. Johnny Appleseed was actually traveling the colonies teaching people to grow apples so that they could make apple brandy. It was not to eat apples because they are good for you. That is the kindergarten version of the story. Highly recommend everybody go Wikipedia Johnny Appleseed, read up on this weird man.
Get woke, people.
Get woke. He never wore shoes. It's a weird guy.
Just walked around drunk, trying to get people to
grow more, make more brandy. Yeah. American hero.
I think we may have talked about it the last time I was here, but I don't think we didn't touch on this time, like the history of rye making in Maryland.
It goes back.
That was one of the things I was really interested to learn when I did that. Maryland was one of the largest producers before Prohibition of
and post-Prohibition
of rye whiskey.
Yeah. Afterwards as well. Yeah, I think if I recall right, Pennsylvania made more proof gallons at the peak, and Maryland had more distilleries at the peak. Okay. So Maryland and Pennsylvania are the cradle of rye whiskey, without a doubt. And that's why there's kind of two distinct styles of rye. Okay, there's infinite styles of rye, but named styles of rye, there are primarily two types of rye that people talk about as kind of the classic styles, which would be Pennsylvania style rye, also known as Monongahela, which is a high rye content, usually 90 plus, 95.
Monongahela.
No, not Gila. Monongahela.
Monongahela. I mean, it probably is properly pronounced Monongahela, but if you live in Monongahela or in that surrounding area, you're going to call it Monongahela.
Okay.
Because we pronounce everything wrong. I'm from that area.
All right. I've said that word out loud a lot. Nobody's ever corrected me.
Well,
I've heard it.
Everyone
must be your life. You must be correcting people.
That's actually the first time I ever heard someone say it.
All right. Well,
outside of people in that area, that would
right. They're getting it right.
Like Dale Carnegie. Apparently, Andrew Carnegie was huge in Pittsburgh, but then there's the betterment classes that Dale Carnegie does. Apparently, though, Carnegie is not pronounced Carnegie. It's
Carnegie?
Carnegie.
Like Carnegie Hall.
Yeah, but it's, if you're in Pittsburgh, where Carnegie was from, it's Carnegie.
Carnegie.
Yeah. Weird. So that means it's right, because it's he was from there, and we'll say it however we want.
I'm willing to roll with that. So Pennsylvania rye would be high rye content, 95% rye, 5% malted barley, pretty typical. And then Maryland style rye is typically a high corn content rye. So 51% rye, mostly the rest corn with a little bit of malted barley in there to give you the chemical stuff you need for the mash. And those are the two primary styles. But during the peak of rye whiskey making, there would have been both styles of rye made in both states, as well as infinite other styles of rye, because
just
people wanted to do stuff.
stuff.
People were still creative in 1850. So so people just wanted to do everything. So there was a lot of rye whiskey out there historically, but Maryland and Pennsylvania styles that's kind of when people talk about them now, they're referring to those two mash bills.
Now, were those differences based on crops grown in those areas, or was it purely just a flavor preference?
My historical understanding, I would say, is incomplete in that respect. I don't think that it was especially based on the crops, that there was corn in Maryland and there wasn't in Pennsylvania. They're close enough also to where I'd think if someone wanted corn in Pennsylvania, they'd just
go get some corn.
So I don't think it was necessarily an availability thing. Maybe if you go way, way back before there was travel infrastructure, maybe you could get there. But like I said, rye wasn't really the first thing that they were making. The first things they were drinking in the colonies was rum from the Caribbean and apple brandy. And then there was an embargo on the Caribbean where you couldn't get sugar and you couldn't get rum. And so we had all these people who drank a lot of hard liquor, and they looked at the Irish and the Scottish settlers, and they were like, what is that you're drinking?
Let's do some of that.
And so the Irish and the Scottish taught everybody how to make this grain spirit that they had been making, because they brought the tradition over from Ireland and Scotland. And rye was the cover crop. So that was the available grain, and that's what they brought over.
So if there's any lesson to be learned, that if people want to drink alcohol, they're going to find a way to.
I think we've learned that many times in history. There's some very distinct
species.
I recall there's something in the 20s about people drinking alcohol when they weren't supposed to. I'm not.
So we talked a little bit about.
Do y'all talk about Maryland's history and Prohibition?
No.
Have y'all ever gotten into that?
No, we haven't.
Do you know why Maryland's called the Free State?
Oh, you know what? I had a vague teaching of that recently, so I don't remember any of the details. So drop some knowledge on us.
When Prohibition passed as national law, 49 states passed statewide prohibition laws as well, which enabled their own personal law enforcement agencies and city law enforcement to enforce prohibition. So every state had a state-level prohibition at the same time, except for Maryland. And the Maryland legislature and governor were very clear. They said, we're not going to enforce this law. It's dumb. If the feds want to come here and bust people, then hey, you know what? That's the law. You guys can do it. But our police officers and our infrastructure will not be used to enforce prohibition at all, which is why Baltimore was known as the Wet City. So if you'll see things branded Wet City.
I've always wondered that, why there was so much Wet City
as
stuff.
opposed to Dry County, right? So the United States was dry. Baltimore was wet.
Nice.
The Wet City. And Maryland was the Free State because it was our cultural history. We had all the massive German and Irish settlers who didn't just drink for inebriation's sake. It was part of their culture.
Yeah.
You know, Germans were having beer for breakfast. They would work on the farm, and beer was a big part of their caloric intake. And it kind of went back way further than the Maryland state thought we should be severing this cultural tie to their European history. So there's a lot of alcohol history local to Maryland and in Baltimore, but that's why there's some very famous speakeasies and bootleggers, and a lot of the kind of bootlegging culture. A lot of it ran through Baltimore and out of Baltimore because there was less. There was no regulation on the statewide level, but also it was just the feds, and they were working without cooperation of local law enforcement. So it's good.
I'm semi-ashamed to myself for not knowing that.
It's a pretty cool little part of Maryland history. Yeah.
So did Maryland ever pass laws to enforce it,
nope.
or the whole time?
The whole time we were the Free State. That's what we did.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
I wonder if that meant within Maryland there was a lot less of people being arrested, or did the feds enforce?
The feds definitely were in Baltimore and would try and catch bootleggers, and if they kind of there are certainly stories where they had to use local law enforcement, but it was all their impetus, right? There wasn't a local level enforcement of anything. So I don't know if there was less arrest, because I think there was more crime is the thing. Okay. Is that this was a really natural place for all the bootleggers to be, because they had to contend less with the local law enforcement than other places. So I'm sure the feds had a really big presence, but there's some really great, kind of forgive me for glancing at my phone, but there's a great headline from Prohibition. How do I look at my own tweets?
It's so weird to think that at a time that there was enough people who were against drinking that it was completely outlawed.
It's the story of it is great. Everybody should read about it. It's a really crazy movement that was backed it was a huge win. It kind of created the modern lobbying system. The person who got Prohibition supported and passed, basically all modern lobbying agencies and lobbyists model after him. He invented this way of getting politicians as groups together to support things by kind of the art of that lobbyist deal, and he invented it, and he did it very, very well, and he got very famous for it.
So he's to thank for a bunch of horrible things. A bunch of
horrible things, yeah, including Prohibition. But this is a headline from Prohibition. Mob in Baltimore attacks dry agents. Crowd of 500 wields axes on autos and hurls bricks at 16 federal men on raid.
I mean, that could have been last week, though.
True. Well, Baltimore has another name, which is Mobtown. Yeah. And it was given the name Mobtown, I believe, by the Baltimore Sun in like the 1800s, because Baltimoreans were so quick to form mobs and riot. There's like stories of, the banker closed the bank and screwed all of these people. So they formed a mob and tore the front of his house off, and it's like, I mean, there's just a million stories, but that's where the name Mobtown comes from.
Nice.
So yeah, the storied history, Baltimore, Free State, Wet City, Mobtown, and it all kind of has great stories behind it. But this particular story was like bootleggers loading up 2 trucks, and feds tried to bust them, and then all of a sudden there were 500 Baltimoreans hurling bricks trying to help them get away. Exactly.
Oh, that's hilarious. And so, do you have anything else you want to tell us about?
Man, that's about it. Please come try our whiskey. We're really excited to finally get it out. We feel like we took the long road. We really do our best not to kind of cut corners, and we really want to do special products, and we just can't wait for people to try the whiskey. So March 17th, from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., we will be tasting. We'll be selling the bottles that are available. There'll be food. There'll be cocktails with our other spirits. Hopefully the weather cooperates, but it doesn't matter. We'll be there if it doesn't. We're just going to be there. We're going to be selling our whiskey. And we're super excited about it.
People should definitely go try it. It is amazing. So will it go into distribution too, or will you only be able to? I mean, obviously
it will eventually. So the first batch is distillery only. The second batch, we're going to send some to distribution because we've got accounts that have really supported us that we have promised bottles to, and they've supported us for the years past.
Are any of those accounts ones that'll make it into Frederick?
Plausibly.
Okay,
yeah, we'll see.
Just plan on if I have to take a road trip.
Yeah, we should either way. And then once we're in the Union Collective and we're bottling whiskey regularly, we will keep as much at the distillery as we need to fill the need. And we do expect a lot of foot traffic at the Union Collective. So we'd really like to supply most of it through the distillery. So kind of how much goes out for distribution is a number we don't know yet because we don't know how much leftover we will have. And we'd love to have some on the market, but we really love people coming to the distillery. We love to be able to lead people through the notes. And for the first 2 years, there's just a limited amount of it because I can tell you exactly how much of it there is for the first 2 years because we've already made it. After we scale up production, then we should really be able to give anybody who wants it, both at the distillery and in the market, and plausibly, in DC or Pennsylvania, kind of another market or two in a couple of years from now when it's scaled up. But for the first couple of years, it's going to be these very small batches we've been able to make. But full-size barrels, straight rye whiskey, made in Baltimore. Pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So a couple, I forgot to mention in the beginning, coming up, we have the 2nd annual Frederick Craft Spirits Festival that I hope to see you guys at again.
We'll be there.
This time it'll be indoors, so we won't get drenched on in cold weather. It's Saturday, April 21st at the Frederick Fairgrounds from 2 to 6 p.m. Tickets will be on sale soon at frederickspiritsfestival.com. And coming up, we also have some great shows that I want to talk about. We'll be releasing later this week an episode recorded with Hugh Sisson of Heavy Seas. Then on Friday, Graham and I are heading back to the same area, and I get to interview the brewmaster for Guinness's U.S. Baltimore brewery, which I'm excited about because I've been trying to get this interview scheduled for I don't even know how long now.
Do some Guinness Bort. Bring it up.
Yeah, I'll pitch it to him. There's this new craze that's about you could get on the cutting edge. Although I don't want to bring it. I don't know if I want to bring that up to Diageo though. They may try to steal the Bort train.
They might just try and buy us.
All right, I'll bring it up to them if you want. Then
bring it up.
And I think that episode, it won't be a live one. We'll release that on St. Patrick's Day because it just seems silly not to.
Yeah, cool.
And we got some other great things coming up, but just keep your eyes open and thank you for coming out.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Giving us the first public taste of Epic. It was an apt choice of a name.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for watching and listening. Cheers.